Alright, so now I wanted to go back to our segment where we talk about Stephen King's novellas, even though this is probably a little bit cheating because I think Cycle of the Werewolf is considered a novelette as opposed to a novella, which is apparently shorter technically, but it's close enough that this is where we're going to put it. Just so we have an excuse to talk about it. And I was really surprised when I was trying to think of what other King stuff to do, because I have seen Silver Bullet so many times at this point. I think to the point that I had kind of just assumed in my mind we had probably talked about it on this channel at some point. And I don't think we have, so I feel this is the best way to probably go about it, because talking about Cycle of the Werewolf, I really, really love this story. And in this particular book that has like the illustrations and stuff like that, as it jumps from the months, and it shows like the killings and stuff like that, and the dream, all of that. And I just really want to go through this also as much as I want to go through the movie. And so, talking about King going in, because we've talked a lot about King doing all these different, finding all these different things in like daily life and being able to make them terrifying is basically his whole forte. And so to be able to tackle classic stuff like when he does like vampires, like Salem's Lot, or something like werewolves with this, and seeing what he can do, bringing his own touch to these stories that we kind of know already. And this one is, I can't think of, like, I love werewolf movies and werewolf stories, but I don't know of any that I personally find, like, scary or terrifying in any particular way. I just like them for what they are. But it's reading Cycle of the Werewolf is when you really see the potential for just how scary a werewolf story can get. And in very King fashion also. And it's like, even when he's describing where it came from, or rather not describing where it came from, because we never really know, which is great. Like, the fact that we don't know how Reverend Lowe even turned, like, it's never established in movie or story, is already a cool way to do it. And then the way he describes it as basically, he says that the werewolf comes with no more reason than cancer, a murderer, or a tornado. And he says, its time is now, its place is here. And just that alone, starting it off with that description, where it just inexplicably exists to kill and be evil with no reason, is just really... that already is a very terrifying way to approach this. And I think not giving it an origin really, really helps play into that a lot. Because I think typically, you know, when you start a werewolf story, you always know where it came from in one sense or another. And here, it's just a mystery. It's a mystery road that we don't even go down, which I really love. And when he's describing not just the attacks, but also, like, the sounds are described a lot in this story. When he talks about the snarls of the wolf sound terribly human, terribly like human words is what it is. And that visual that it puts in your head of the human and wolf kind of being all in one, or when he describes, like, how it's the wolf, but it's clearly human fingers that have claws, and it's just like, when it's that in-between, there's just something so... I feel like it's actually not acknowledged enough explicitly that werewolves are like body horror in a way, and I feel like that's another thing that King really approaches this whole thing with. And the idea of going down the months each at a time, and for a while it's basically, well, really the whole thing is, with each month we have a new attack, and the way he just sort of lays that out in this really smooth structure that eventually comes full circle back around to Marty. But starting with that opening scene, and then this one, where we're in February on Valentine's Day, and we have this tragic woman that, like, is just obsessed with love, and she, like, writes Valentines to herself from celebrities, and she's the one that's attacked on Valentine's Day, of course. And this idea of seeing it from her perspective, where she's so, like, lost in this feeling of just needing somebody to love, for somebody to love her, that she's able to rationalize it when she sees a figure outside of her window. And it's like a crouched figure, and the way it starts to dawn on her that this is not a person, or at least not a regular person. And then when it comes through the window, and she basically transitions from, oh, this is a dream, to this is not a dream. And that whole thing is just so horrific. And the way that it says, there was a man crouched outside, a man that she knows. And it's like the way it just creeps up on you. And it's, yeah, it's, so going on that, we introduce the library character, and this guy with the long-suffering wife. And when we hear about this, and the fact that everybody kind of knows what's going on, and then it says, the town keeps its secrets. And it's like, having this community that you start off with, and it's like, everything feels really close-knit, and everybody knows everybody, and everybody takes care of everybody. And then that having, like, these sort of dark secrets that everybody knows that are just happening, it's like, it's so pure King when he's describing just the community and the way they approach the events that are happening, especially the darker events that are happening in this town. And that's just this really, it's weird how cozy of a feeling King's communities can be, because they're so vivid. And you kind of feel like you know the people, even though really dark things are happening and some really evil people are lurking in them and evil things and these gruesome events are happening. Like I said, there's a weirdly comforting thing about coming into King's stories. Like, it feels like being in Castle Rock or something, or, you know, God forbid, Derry. But either way, they all feel like real places that have these evils in them. And it's just this place unlike any other, especially from a horror author, or any author in general, really. Like, there's very few that can really take you to places like this where you feel like you live there, and give you this comfort, even when, like I said, things like this are happening. And then, of course, we get to another King staple, which is the fact that children are not off limits to this evil and this violence. So we have this character, Brady, who gets caught up with his kite at the park, and it's when it starts to get dark after he's lost track of time, and it's like he hears the stories about the werewolf and these stories that he's like laughed at, and it's like, oh, there's no such thing as werewolves, that's not real, there's no monster or anything like that. And then this description of how easy it can be to lose track of time, especially if you're a kid, and then the fact that you're safe in the light, but then you get so lost, it starts to get dark, something you have no control over whatsoever, and then suddenly this panic will set in. He describes it as the stories that he laughed at once are now like starting to feel really real, and then that's when he's very gruesomely attacked. And it's just like all these sort of looming factors over this also, and as the months progress, and it becomes more and more apparent that this is what's going on, or at the very least, there's one particular thing that is out here just gruesomely tearing people apart. And then we get into Reverend Lowe's dream sequence, and this idea of, and this is before we know what's going on with him. So from his perspective, it's like he's having this dream of everybody he knows just turning. And once again, the descriptions here, where he talks about, again, the shrieking in voices that are almost human, just adding in that humanity to the monstrosity of, like, the wolf is where the real terror is at. And this description of everybody turning. Like, we've seen a lot of, like, horrific turns into werewolves in movies once we really got those effects in order with, like, American Werewolf in London and Forward. And to hear King describe it in detail, though, and talks about how, like, like the fur comes out of their clothes like cotton out of an old couch or something, and it's just really, you just feel that terror of imagine these are all the people that you know, and you're watching something like this horrific happen. Well, again, before we know where he's actually at. Because we do know also that there's a long time where Reverend Lowe doesn't know what's going on. So he's just having these dreams sort of only in the context of this is what's actually happening in town to somebody that we know. And not realizing how close it actually is. And then when he finds that janitor's body, and it's at this point you kind of think about, like, there's the janitor that Reverend Lowe finds, and then there's, like, the drifter from earlier. And it's like, I love the way we already have, like, a close-knit community in this story, and characters and character names that we know, and their occupations and their relationships and all that stuff. But then you look at, like, the janitor and the drifter and stuff, and it's like, these are characters that we don't even know, but still their deaths manage to be very scary in context, and just adding to the sort of mystery of who it is or what's going on and how horrific the killings are. And it's like, to be able to do that with characters that we don't even know and give that weight, it is really impressive also. So now we get to the point that when I first read the story a long time ago, this was the segment that I always really remembered and always really, really stuck with me and made me think, like, oh, this is how horrifying the werewolf concept can actually be. And it's the moment in the story that's not in the movie, in the cafe, when the customer comes in, and at this time we still don't know who it is yet. He behind the counter, he knows, but King is not telling us yet. And then the way the guy Alfie, I think his name was, sees the reflection of him turn in the coffee maker. And like, almost seeing it like it's right there firsthand, but it's also not firsthand because of the reflection. There's something about that that's really unsettling in this great way. And then the way he describes, again, the sound, the scream breaks apart and drops like an elevator through registers of sound into a bellowing growl of rage. And like I said, just in the sound alone. But this is also kind of the first moment we get descriptions of what the bodies look like after the fact, I think, up until this point, and this is the first moment where we really, like, are seeing all the gory details in real time of him being killed, and like what parts of him are being hid, and like how the last thing he sees is the moonlight and stuff like that. And this is like the first time we're like really up close and personal to one of the attacks as they're happening, and the person's like dying in real time. And that's, like I said, that's the part of the story that always just etched itself in my brain and is still like sort of my main takeaway of the story itself. Even I love everything in the story, and there's so many terrifying things in the story itself already. But then it's finally, if you're more familiar with Silver Bullet before you go into Cycle of the Werewolf, you're probably surprised how late Marty comes into the story. It's like, I think it's just about exactly halfway. And of course halfway through the year in July with Marty's obsession with the 4th of July. And I like how indirectly relatable that is, the way Marty like really needs the fireworks on the 4th of July, and this is what he looks forward to the most. And it's like, if you're talking about this time of year, it's like Marty feels about the 4th of July the way a lot of us and people like me feel about Halloween and this whole season and this whole time. And it's like, if you took that away, that's what Marty feels like when the fireworks get canceled. And it's like, so already he's relatable in that sense, with a holiday meaning this much to him. And then all of the characters that are in his life that we meet, his relationship with his uncle, of course, is a really big player. I love the his overcompensating dad and his like big pal voice, I think he calls it. And there is his sister, who is basically a Stephen King bully, but with like more. But you know the Stephen King bullies, the ones that are like weirdly sadistic. So she's not quite on that level, but she is needlessly cruel to Marty whenever she can be, mostly out of jealousy and mostly out of being a sibling rivalry kind of thing. But still. And then I love the fact that on top of that, King does throw in those moments where, like when they first hear the wolf scream outside, the first thing she does is yell out for Marty and wonder if he's okay. And then there's the detail where she made him his Yoda staff for his costume. And it's like, I love throwing in those little moments of heart to show that they really do love each other as siblings, even though most of the time she's very cruel to him. There's something quite sort of realistic about that, I guess. And then I also like, not that I don't like what the movie does, but I like the fact that you tend to expect that in a movie or story, when a child sees a werewolf, I mean, there's literally The Boy That Cried Wolf, but when a child sees a werewolf, they're not going to be believed, and there's going to be a whole portion of the story where nobody believes what they've seen. And that is what we do in the movie, but we'll talk about the movie. But I like the fact that not only is Marty believed, like, immediately in the story, but he kind of becomes almost famous for being, like, the sole witness so far of the wolf and being able to tell the story about it. So I think that's a really nice sort of turn there. And then, again, we get another graphic killing that's also illustrated in this book, with Constable Neary, where it's this other horrific description involving sound, where it talks about his cheek being ripped open, which you can actually see there in the illustration. And in the description it says, he screams out of his mouth and out of his cheek. And that's the end of him, essentially. So those little descriptions also, where it's like, the fact that the gore of it can be just as scary as anything else, as the suspense of it, or any other kind of description. Which is also, like, you know, the power of words and the way King can use them. And so, naturally, going through the months, we're going to get to October. And, of course, again, how much we love this season, the fall descriptions are perfect. And then we get to this point in the story where it's a very cool way to reveal it. Where one thing about these illustrations that are in this version of the book is some of them do come a little early. So, like, on this page, it's, like, revealed that Reverend Lowe is the one with the missing eye, but that's not actually revealed until, like, the next page or two over. But that happens a couple of times. But even so, when you're look at this reveal and how it's done, and the idea of Marty looking for somebody with one eye, and so the perfect setting for that is Halloween, when you're going door to door and you're looking, and the fact that Marty's in a mask, so he's unidentifiable, even though Lowe doesn't know that it's him anyway. Obviously, the wheelchair can also give him away, given how small the town is. But I also like the fact that he didn't know until this moment that Lowe was the one with the missing eye, and the reasoning is that he's from a Baptist church, and Marty goes to a Catholic church, so they don't really cross paths often. So this would be the first time he's noticing that the Reverend has one eye, and then that this is the reveal of it on Halloween, no less. Has always been really cool to me. And like I was saying, also just it's an interesting piece of character work with Lowe, the way he didn't know for a while, and any time there were clues to him being the wolf, he would rationalize it away, more or less believably. And the way they describe, like, he doesn't know what's going on, but after he's been the wolf, or he's about to be the wolf, he feels amazing. And it's like this very intoxicating, almost addictive feeling, that he's very, very slowly realizing exactly what it is. And to the point that we get even a satisfying moment where Milt is finally killed. And, of course, just right after the detail of, by the way, he gave his wife herpes before he was killed, knowingly. And so that's obviously satisfying as well. And then eventually we do get to our climax, where we come back full circle to Marty and his silver bullet that his uncle was able to get him, and we have our final showdown and climax. And that's that story. And like I said, I really, really love this story and the structure of it and the descriptions. I do like... some of these are like there is an illustration of my favorite scene in the cafe. And it's like, I do think there's a lot of things that are better when they're images in your mind. But I still appreciate this version. Bernie Wrightson is the illustrator. And so, I do love everything about this. So, as far as adapting it, it doesn't take too much, because King himself ended up adapting it, so all the changes are his own changes to his own story. And, they're pretty interesting ones, and I'd be really curious to know, we can talk about them, but I'd be curious to know, the reasoning behind some of the choices, like, for real. I do know that the movie is narrated by his sister, Jane, at this point. So we're kind of seeing Marty's story from her perspective. So that's another thing. We were talking about the sibling rivalry, but she actually really has a lot of love for him. And to narrated from that perspective is a really cool choice, in a way that really shows that that the heart of the story is a very important part of it. And that's another thing that King is very, very good at, that he doesn't get enough credit for, is how human and emotional his stories can be within all of the horror that's happening. And oftentimes the horror is like representative of what's going on with the characters emotionally. It's so well done. And then, of course, we get our early killings. Unlike the story, the movie does go back and forth between Marty's story and then us seeing another kill, where we do start on the railroad again, and the fact that it was first, like, people didn't jump to werewolf or murderer immediately because he worked on a railroad, he was often drunk, and he was decapitated. It's like, it kind of writes its own story, and it can be dismissed. And then we get these other killings, and I like the fact that as audience members, we can get, like, different feelings about them. Like, we have instead of the loved one, we have the pregnant woman who's been abandoned, and so she's essentially about to commit suicide. And, like, she's dumped all the pills out and everything, and she's saying she's gonna do it, and then it's in this moment that she's killed, which is an interesting... It ends up being a clue as to who the werewolf is later, it turns out. That he killed a woman while she was suicidal. And there's definitely something tragic about that. And then we've got Brady, and the interesting thing about Brady is we're of two minds about him. First of all, he is just a kid, and like in the story especially, that's very disturbing, especially with how brutally he's killed. But they separate how we feel about him between the way he treats Jane and the way he's like this bully that's a little out of control. But then there's the other side of it where he's like genuinely Marty's best friend, and when we meet his dad after the fact and see what it's done to him, and it's like there's this balance of, oh, he was kind of this shit kid, but he was also somebody's best friend and somebody's son. So like it humanizes him while also kind of making him one of those sort of stereotype characters, and finds an in-between here that adds this certain depth to his death and what it does to the rest of the town, and it ends up causing the mob. And then we've got the girl who's only established like in one scene, but who is like, I guess a kind of girlfriend on Marty, or they at least have crushes on each other. And her piece of shit dad, the guy that says like he'd basically eradicate disabled people because they take welfare and stuff like that. And it's like, he's the guy where it's like, okay, we have to see him die. And then the way it kind of goes above and beyond with the impalement before he's pulled under the floor. So it's like there's like a gray area for some of these, and then there's some that are just tragic, and then there's some where it's like, oh yeah, it's going to be great to watch that guy get mangled by this wolf. And so I like the way they played with that and gave us all those different emotions about the different killings. So the idea of, since the story kind of eventually came full circle to Marty, and while he was not introduced until halfway through the story, I do think it was a great call to basically make Marty the main character of the movie. If you were going to make somebody the main character, that's who it would be. With this great young Corey Haim performance, I don't know if he would like really taken off by this point, but this is before he had like teamed up with Feldman and they did their whole thing. So it was like early in his young career, and immediately there's this. Yeah, there's star quality, especially playing this character in such a sympathetic way, but also in a way that's believable, that he would get himself into this kind of trouble and kind of fearlessly, but not too fearlessly, go into situations like this. Like, he's willing to go out into the dark by himself in the middle of nowhere while there's these killings going on just to set fireworks off for his own show. All of it is believable. And also his relationship with Gary Busey playing the uncle, and the back and forth here. And I also think it's a nice touch to call the chair the silver bullet. It's surprising that that's actually not something from the story. And so, looking at all the relationships here, we talked about his relationship with Jane, and I like this sort of parallel of the brother-sister turmoil, because we do have the setup where the sibling rivalry with Marty and Jane, but then we have the brother-sister turmoil going on with the mom and the uncle. And I like the fact that in the story, the mom's beef with the uncle is that he gave him the fireworks, and it basically gets him kicked out of the house and banished for a bit. But I like in the movie that it's kind of something that was always there because of his drinking problem and how he kind of resents her for always trying to control his life, and bringing in that sort of real quality into it. And I was just talking with a friend the other day about how I don't. People have probably forgotten this at this point, given what he's done for the past couple of decades or so. But there was a time where Gary Busey was an amazing actor, and one of the things he could do so well was be so natural. Like he could really command the screen in kind of a big way, but also in these moments that are just so human and so believable is something he was so good at in this era. And he has plenty of those moments, whether it be with the mom or with Marty or whoever here. And so seeing those relationships really add this great layer to the movie. And then also we were talking about the town mob that eventually builds and the setting up of the community in it. And I like the fact that how we talked about in the story where he talks about there being, deep, dark secrets that the town keeps. The fact that we see the community set up here and the narration tells us during this gathering of the town, this is like everybody knows everybody and you take care of somebody else just as much as you take care of yourself, and they establish this, really seemingly wonderful small place, and then at this moment when they turn into a mob after Brady is killed, you see these people turn feral, and you even see it before them when they're in the bar and they're kind of arguing about what's going on, and you can see it like simmering, and then it's when Brady's killed and his dad comes in and basically rallies everyone into a mob that you kind of see the whole town go to this dark place that they're capable of, and go out there and kind of try to become their own monster. They don't succeed, but they get there. And there's faces in, like, Terry O'Quinn is the chief or the sheriff, whichever it was, and Lawrence Tierney's in there as, like, the bartender with the bat. And they get massacred, essentially. And what I love about this moment, too, is when they're leaving and we see Reverend Lowe trying to stop them, and all of this transitions into the dream sequence that we got in the story. And what I like about this is, first of all, it's a bit of a tonal change, because we have the moment when Lawrence Tierney gets the bat, the wolf gets the bat from him and starts beating him with it after they've massacred several of the other members of the mob. And then there's this, what has to be, I imagine, a comedic cut. Like, I imagine it has to be intentionally, like, all of this carnage, and then it just cuts to the funeral with all the coffins. There's something very darkly funny about that. And then that's when we realize this is progressing into the dream, where everybody turns. Amazing effects, by the way, for the most part, as all these different, like, the one itself already is impressive enough, and then to see, like, a whole town of people turning, it's a wild scene, with, like, the organ being played maniacally, and everything going dark, and and seeing the faces change, and, like, it does so well at doing, like, that really nightmarish quality, and I like the way it plays with, because at this point in the story, we don't know yet that it's Reverend Lowe. So we get this moment here that really plays with that, where he sits up in bed afterwards, and we think, he might be having this dream because, obviously, there is a werewolf afoot. He might also be having this dream because of the guilt from when he tried to stop the mob and failed. And then he says, let it end, like, please God, let it end. And it's like, when you watch that back, yeah, you could see it as, oh, he feels guilt, or it's just terror, and, oh my God, he wants this, killing spree to end. You can look at it as he's freaking out because he knows that it's him, and that's why he has dreams like this, and saying let it end is like, let my reign of terror end. Because, unlike the story, I feel like there's, at least I don't remember, and I've seen the movie several times, there's no indication that Reverend Lowe doesn't know what's going on. I feel like the Reverend Lowe in the movie seems like he's always aware. At least as far as we know, in the story that we see, he's always aware of what's going on, and that it's him. And so, going on that, that's when we get into this fantastic section of the movie. I'll say the movie's already great at this point, but this particular section, where there's 3 sort of different segments that happened in succession, this is like my whole favorite section of the movie. So, starting with when Marty gets the fireworks and goes out onto the bridge. I like the idea of, in the story, he just did it in the backyard. I love the idea of him, like, going out into the night, like, way out into the night, and kind of isolating himself in this really dangerous way on this bridge to do the fireworks. And then this moment where it pans over and we see the wolf and the fireworks reflecting off of the water, and this quick thinking attack where he shoots him in the eye and leaves. That's a really thrilling segment. Like I said, I think him being so isolated out there really adds a lot to the terror of it. So I really like that addition. And then when it comes to the mystery angle of now who has one eye, and so we have Jane's investigation, looking around town for this person, doing the whole cans thing as like a facade. And I love the way they play with like the suspense of that. Like when the guy comes to the door and he slowly comes around the corner, and then we reveal that it's not him. Or we have the guy at the barbershop whose face is like wrapped, and she like slowly unwraps it. And it's like, and we get like these really uncomfortable close-ups, and it's like, I really, really love this sequence. And then when she gets to the Reverend and we realize that it's him, I like the fact that we see it before she does. Because there's this whole, because it would be this thing where it's like, we basically figure it out. Like, it's very clever, like, blocking the way that he's, like, crouched down and he kind of turns, but he turns with this side of his face, so we can't see. But it's like, I feel like the movie knew that, whether it be King or the director, knew that by this point we had probably figured it out, so they weren't going to stretch it out any longer. So I like the fact that we immediately see, right after this, that it is him, but she doesn't yet, and then when it is revealed to her is after she's found the bat. So it's like it's all clicked together right away when she sees everything all at once. And like I said, it could have been effective to show like, oh my god, it's the bat, it's him, and then we see him with the one eye. Like I said, I like the fact that they were like, I think the audience probably knows at this point, so let's just show it now in this moment before she knows. And it kind of gives us this feeling for a second that she's like in danger, because we know something she doesn't. So I think that really works on a lot of levels. And then we get this great sequence where the Reverend chases Marty. And the fact that we get this whole, I'm doing this to serve God speech, it like adds another layer to it. Like I said, stuff I'm surprised was not in the story. But I love the way, especially with adding this chase sequence, that, because you would think like, oh man, they really movie-ified it by taking this story that's kind of low-key by comparison, and then they've, you know, put like an action scene in it and stuff like that. But I feel like the scene is so well done, and doesn't, and it not, when it deviates from the story, it does it in ways that are like, oh, that's a really cool change, rather than something like, oh, they shouldn't have done that. Like, all the changes, I really don't mind at all, and a lot of them, I think, kind of really sort of elevate the story in a different way. Not like completely, but like, it's a cool addition to what's already good, is what I feel like is going on here. But the way that it shows that in this particular case, King really seemed to understand, like, what works as a story and what works as a movie, and these are some of the changes that he made. So I really love those sequences. And then, once again, adding, like, more suspense as far as a movie goes, sort of upping the stakes for this climax, where in the story there's 2 silver bullets, in the movie there's only 1 they can use. It might be a bit overkill that he loses the bullet for a second in the grate, but and it might feel a bit anticlimactic that had the bullet not gone down into the grate, this would have been a very fast climax. It would have been just over very quickly. So it gives us just enough time for Red to get thrown around a couple of times, and then he gets shot and it's over. But again, I also feel like it's one of those things of, the movie didn't feel the need to drag anything out particularly, like we saw with the reveal of the Reverend. So I've actually never had much of, like, I notice that the climax happens very quickly, but it's never really bothered me, the way it plays out, because it's also the way they very dramatically show the de-transformation back into the Reverend. Feels very solid, and then when we get to that last moment, when she tells them, when they say that they love each other, and it's like I said, how that's the heart of it the whole time. And like I said, having the narration focus on that and then end on that note is kind of really beautiful. So yeah, I really love this movie. Like I said, I've watched it so many times. I watch it probably at least once a year, I think. And I really love this story a lot. Like as far as like personal favorite like King stories, whether it be like, you know, novels or novellas or short stories or whatever, I'm not even sure like how to categorize this, but it's a story I really, really love coming back to. And if you were to ask me like, you know, favorite King stories, I would say this would probably come up. So that's how I feel about these. So I think we have one or two more King things coming, and obviously much more October stuff going on. We've got a franchise to talk about over a few videos. We've got a big video to go out on Halloween that the four of us did, and all this other stuff, and then we'll be going into our award stuff and all the other stuff, you know. So until the next thing, I think that's it.